Have you ever walked for 6 hours straight? How about 6 days straight? Sounds impossible, but what if we told you that it was possible and that it already happened 81 years ago here in the Philippines? In today's video, pack up, get your water jug ready, and let's take a walk and remember what happened in the Bataan Death March. Trigger warning, this video will mention graphic scenes of brutality and violence. It all started in December 1941 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, signaling the entry of the United States into the global conflict that is World War II. But wait, how are we connected to this? We are literally thousands of miles away from Japan and much more from America. If we go back in history, the Philippines was under the colonial rule of the Americans since 1898, and until 1941, the United States still had a strong hold on the country. Because of our strong connections with the United States and our strategic position in the Pacific, we were technically closer to Japan, so the Japanese set their eyes on the Philippines as a US colony. Soon after, the Japanese began their attack on several parts of the Philippines, and one man was tasked with quelling the Japanese invasion, General Douglas MacArthur, whom you might famously know as the one who uttered the words, "I shall return." You could only imagine how much chaos was happening during this time. Battles were ongoing, bombings were heard in every town, and more Japanese troops came in. MacArthur, in his quest to defend the Philippines from the Pacific, put his big guy face on and told everyone that he and his troops of 130,000 men were ready for whatever the Japanese would do. Except that it wasn't true. Most of the men in his troops were not properly trained for combat and war. Moreover, they lacked the ammunition, transportation, and resources to last them the entire battle against the Japanese. Ever heard the saying, "A plan without action is just a dream"? Well, this quote applies well to MacArthur's troops. Defending the country from the Japanese slowly started to look just like a dream. The lack of planning would cause their surrender to the Japanese troops after 3 months of battle in Bataan, from January 7 to April 9, 1942. Most of the Filipino and American troops were already weak and sick from a variety of diseases, and U.S. Commander Ned King eventually surrendered 76,000 men to the Japanese in Bataan. Take note, this was the largest U.S. commanded army to ever surrender, making it even more devastating. After the devastating surrender, it did not take long for the Japanese to take action. 76,000 men were too much for the Japanese army to control. Why would they waste resources on captured enemies? And so, they did the easiest thing they could do to lessen people. The first act of violence, the Pantingin River Massacre. Here, approximately 400 Filipino officers were brutally executed, without remorse and in desperate need to preserve what was left of their resources. The Japanese knew they would not last long if they stayed in Bataan, and so, the 76,000 prisoners of war were forced to walk 104 kilometers from Bataan to a concentration camp in San Fernando, Pampanga, in what was known as the Bataan Death March. Now, if walking 104 kilometers sounds harsh to you, it was not the worst that happened during the month of March. Under the orders of Japanese General Masaharu Homma, the new prisoners were ordered to surrender all of their belongings to the Japanese officers. If they did not comply, they would be mutilated or instantly killed. The Japanese also maximized their capture of the troops and used them for forced labor, often beating them up if the job was done slowly or incorrectly. In the hot summer months of April and May, the prisoners would not be given water or food. This form of torture was not only used as punishment, but also for the entertainment of Japanese soldiers. They would make prisoners sit by fresh water without allowing them to drink. If any prisoner would be heard asking for water, they would immediately be beheaded or bayoneted. If any prisoner would stop to rest or trip over, they would immediately be beheaded or bayoneted. If any prisoner would be heard complaining, they would immediately be beheaded or bayoneted. No one could escape the brutality. Some too weak to continue the march were put to death or run over by army trucks. Sometimes, one didn't even need a reason to be put to death. Some Japanese soldiers would randomly stab and kill marchers for sport. The prisoners would also have to battle an array of diseases due to malnutrition, fatigue, and unsanitary environmental conditions at the time. Have you ever experienced getting inside a parked car at noon? Then you would know how extremely scorching it is, even sitting in the car for 1 minute. This was the same experience for prisoners of war. The only difference was that they had to endure riding a metal boxcar for an hour without ventilation and share a space dedicated for only 40 people with 100 other prisoners. The trip did not stop there. When they arrived at Capas, they would have to walk again for 9 more miles before finally arriving at their destination. At this point, the prisoners have not yet eaten for 6 to 10 days, and most of those who survived the march only had their first meal when they arrived in San Fernando. Until today, the exact number of casualties could not be determined, but there are estimates of over 5,000 to 18,000 deaths, either caused by natural causes or by Japanese violence. Safety wasn't even guaranteed when they reached the prison camp in San Fernando, as 27,000 more deaths due to disease and malnutrition were recorded in the camp. In the aftermath of the Bataan Death March, the Manila Times, under the supervision of the Japanese forces, reported that soldiers in the march were treated with respect in an attempt to discredit the American propaganda about the injustices of the Death March. We know this wasn't the case, as war veterans from the Philippines and the United States continued to narrate the horrors of what they have experienced in the Death March. Under the Japanese occupation, the Bataan Death March was judged a Japanese war crime, and General Masaharu Homa, the perpetrator of the Bataan Death March, was tried and executed for his war crimes. General Masanobu Suji, who ordered the killing of approximately 400 troops in the Pantingin River massacre, escaped and disappeared until his declared death in 1968, 26 years after the march. The Bataan Death March is only one of the many war crimes committed by the Japanese in the Philippines. In the later years of the Japanese occupation, Filipino women would suffer brutality and violence as comfort women. Houses would be burned down and ravaged by invading troops, and whole cities would be bombed until there were none left. Today, some scholars refer to this period as the worst crime in Philippine history. Every April 9, we commemorate the Day of Valor, or the Araw of Kagitingan, and remember the fall of Bataan, the Death March, and the people who have suffered in defense of the motherland. These perilous periods in the past remind us of why we should not forget our history, for forgetfulness is the enemy of memory, and memory is our weapon in making sure these atrocities never happen again. Have you heard of any stories on the Japanese occupation in your locality? Share and comment it down below. Like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you'd like to learn more with us. Thanks for watching.